Hi, I'm Natalie. 3 months ago, I stood at the altar in what should have been the happiest moment of my life, watching my sister glide down the aisle in a floor-length white gown more elaborate than my own. She wasn't the bride. I was. But you wouldn't have known it from the gasps that rippled through our 200 guests, or the way every camera in that chapel turned away from me to capture her entrance. My mother smiled like she'd planned it. My father looked at his shoes. And my fiancé, standing beside me in his tuxedo, whispered the only thing that kept me from walking out right then: don't let her win. But here's what nobody knew. I'd already planned for this. Every detail, every backup, every nuclear option. Because this wasn't the first time Vanessa tried to steal my spotlight. It was just the first time I was ready for her. So what happens when the underestimated little sister finally fights back with a $250,000 secret? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of my wedding started exactly the way I'd imagined it for years. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of the Magnolia Room at Riverside Estate, casting everything in that golden glow that makes you believe in magic. My bridesmaids were already there, champagne glasses in hand, laughing over mimosas while a stylist carefully pinned flowers into someone's updo. The air smelled like gardenias and expensive perfume. Outside, through the French doors, I could see the ceremony set up on the lawn overlooking the Ashley River. White chairs arranged in perfect rows, an arch draped in silk and cascading roses, the kind of scene you tear out of magazines and pin to vision boards. I stood in front of the floor-length mirror in my bridal suite, still in my robe, staring at the dress hanging beside me. It was beautiful, everything I wanted. Ivory lace with delicate beading, a sweetheart neckline, and a cathedral train that would photograph like a dream. Simple, elegant, timeless. The kind of dress that doesn't scream for attention but commands it anyway. My best friend Kelsey came up behind me, already dressed in her soft blush bridesmaid gown, and squeezed my shoulders. "You're going to be the most beautiful bride Charleston's ever seen," she said, her voice warm with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing someone their entire life. I smiled, trying to absorb her certainty, but there was something gnawing at the edge of my happiness. A familiar feeling I'd learned to recognize over 28 years of being Vanessa Harper's younger sister. Vanessa hadn't arrived yet. She was supposed to be here an hour ago, dressed and ready like the rest of my bridesmaids. But her spot in the room was conspicuously empty, her makeup station untouched, her garment bag still hanging alone on the rack. I'd texted her twice. No response. Called once. Straight to voicemail. It's fine, I told myself, taking a slow breath. She's just running late. Vanessa was always running late, always making an entrance, always needing to be the last one to arrive so everyone would notice. It was her signature move, and I'd stopped letting it bother me years ago. Or at least, I'd gotten better at pretending it didn't bother me. Kelsey must have seen something shift in my expression because she leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "She's going to show up, Nat. And even if she pulls something, today is yours. Nobody can take that away from you." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But Kelsey didn't grow up in my house. She didn't spend every birthday, every graduation, every minor milestone watching Vanessa find a way to redirect the spotlight. When I got accepted to college, Vanessa announced her engagement at the family dinner meant to celebrate me. When I landed my first big client as a graphic designer, she threw a surprise party for herself the same weekend, claiming she'd just gotten a promotion she'd actually received 2 months earlier. When Derek proposed to me on a quiet beach at sunset, Vanessa posted pictures from her own elaborate vacation the next day with a caption about living her best life, attracting more congratulations than my engagement announcement ever did. The photographer, Troy Bennett, knocked lightly on the doorframe before stepping inside. He was a tall man with kind eyes and an easy smile, the sort of person who made you feel comfortable even when a camera was pointed at your face. "Morning, bride," he said, lifting his camera slightly. "Mind if I grab some getting ready shots?" "Of course," I said, forcing brightness into my voice. "Just maybe wait until I'm actually in the dress?" He laughed and nodded, moving around the room to capture candid moments. The bridesmaids clinking glasses, the flower girl twirling in her white dress, my mother adjusting her pearl necklace in the corner while she talked on her phone. My mother. Claire Harper, polished and poised in a champagne-colored gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She'd barely looked at me all morning, too busy coordinating with the venue manager and making sure every detail met her exacting standards. This wedding wasn't just about me marrying Derek. It was a Harper family event, which meant it was a performance, a carefully curated display of wealth and taste for Charleston society pages. Another 30 minutes passed. The makeup artist finished my face, soft and glowing, exactly what I'd requested. The hairstylist secured the last pin in my elegant updo, leaving a few tendrils loose to frame my face. My bridesmaids were all dressed, all ready, all checking their phones and glancing nervously at the door. Still no Vanessa. I reached for my phone again, but Kelsey gently caught my wrist. "Don't," she said quietly. "You'll just stress yourself out. She'll be here. Let's get you in your dress." She was right. I needed to focus on what I could control. I stepped behind the ornate changing screen in the corner of the room, and Kelsey helped me into my gown, carefully guiding my arms through the delicate lace sleeves, zipping up the back, adjusting the train. When I stepped out, the room went quiet. "Oh, Natalie," one of my bridesmaids whispered, her hand over her heart. "You look like a princess." I turned back to the mirror, and for a moment, I forgot about Vanessa. I forgot about the stress and the nagging anxiety. I looked like a bride. My bride. The woman I'd always wanted to be on this day. My mother finally looked up from her phone, and something flickered across her face. Pride, maybe. Or approval. It was hard to tell with her. "You look lovely, dear," she said, in that measured tone she used when she was holding back something bigger. Very appropriate. Appropriate. That was such a Claire Harper word. Not stunning, not breathtaking. Appropriate. I swallowed the sting and smiled. "Thanks, Mom." The door to the suite swung open suddenly, and every head in the room turned. Vanessa swept in like she was walking a red carpet. And that's when I saw it. The dress. She was wearing white. Not ivory, not cream, not champagne, or blush or any of the acceptable adjacent shades a sister might wear to a wedding if she wanted to push boundaries. Pure, bridal white. A fitted mermaid gown with a plunging neckline, intricate beadwork that caught the light with every movement, and a dramatic train that fanned out behind her like she was the one walking down the aisle. Her hair was styled in perfect Hollywood waves, her makeup flawless, her jewelry understated but expensive. She looked like a bride. No, she looked like the bride she'd always wanted to be, and she'd chosen my wedding day to play dress up. The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. My bridesmaids stared, mouths slightly open. Kelsey's face flushed red with anger. Even the makeup artist froze mid-motion, mascara wand still in her hand. My mother, standing near the window, didn't even blink. She just looked at Vanessa, then at me, then back at Vanessa, and said nothing. That silence said everything. Vanessa smiled, that dazzling, innocent smile she'd perfected over the years. The one that said, "Who, me? I didn't do anything wrong." She did a little spin, her train swirling around her ankles. "What do you think?" she asked brightly, as if she were modeling a cocktail dress and not committing what might be the most egregious wedding guest violation in existence. "I found it at this amazing boutique in Savannah. The designer said it was one of a kind. Isn't it stunning?" Nobody spoke. I couldn't. My throat had closed up, my chest tight with an emotion I couldn't quite name. It was beyond anger, beyond hurt. It was the crushing weight of a lifetime of moments just like this one, all piling up at once. Every birthday, every achievement, every moment she'd found a way to steal. And now this. My wedding day. The one day that was supposed to be untouchable. Kelsey stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Vanessa, you can't wear that. You need to change." Vanessa's smile didn't falter. She tilted her head, feigning confusion. Change? Why? It's just a dress. It's a white dress, Kelsey said, her voice rising. To a wedding. You know exactly what you're doing. Oh, come on, Vanessa said with a light laugh, waving her hand dismissively. It's not like I'm trying to upstage anyone. Natalie looks beautiful. We both do. Can't two sisters both look nice? I finally found my voice, though it came out quieter than I intended. Vanessa, please. Can you please change? There was a pause, a flicker of something cold in her eyes before the smile returned. I didn't bring anything else, Nat. I flew in late last night and barely had time to get ready as it is. This is all I have. She looked at my mother, and I followed her gaze. Mom, tell her I look fine. My mother, for the first time that morning, looked genuinely uncomfortable. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She opened her mouth, closed it, then said carefully, Vanessa, maybe you could borrow something from one of the girls? It was the weakest possible intervention, delivered with all the authority of a suggestion rather than a command. And Vanessa knew it. She shrugged, entirely unbothered. I don't think any of their dresses would fit me. Different body types, you know. She gestured vaguely at the bridesmaids, all of whom were staring at her with varying degrees of disbelief and outrage. That's when I realized something. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a thoughtless mistake or a fashion misstep. Vanessa had planned this. She'd chosen this dress, worn it here, and walked into my bridal suite on my wedding day in full bridal white because she wanted this exact reaction. She wanted the shock, the attention, the drama. She wanted to see if I'd break. And judging by the way she was watching me, waiting for tears or yelling or some public meltdown she could later recount as me being unreasonable, she was counting on it. But here's what Vanessa didn't know. 3 weeks ago, after our final dress fitting, Kelsey had pulled me aside with a worried look and said, I hate to even bring this up, but what if Vanessa tries something? What if she shows up in white or makes a scene? And I'd laughed it off at the time, told her my sister wouldn't go that far. But Kelsey had insisted, and together, over wine and takeout in my apartment, we'd made a plan. Just in case. Just in case Vanessa decided that my happiness was too much for her to bear. I took a slow breath, smoothing down the front of my dress, and felt a strange calm settle over me. Fine, I said, my voice steady now. Wear whatever you want, Vanessa. It's fine. Kelsey whipped around to look at me, her eyes wide with alarm. Nat, no, you can't just, it's fine, I repeated, meeting Vanessa's gaze directly. If that's what makes you happy, wear it. Vanessa blinked, clearly thrown. She'd been expecting a fight, expecting me to beg or cry or cause a scene that would make me look like the unreasonable one. But I wasn't giving her that satisfaction. Not this time. She recovered quickly, her smile returning full force. See? Natalie gets it. We're both going to look amazing today. I turned away from her, catching Kelsey's eye. Kelsey looked like she wanted to strangle someone, but I gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. Trust me, I mouthed. She hesitated, then slowly nodded back, though confusion was written all over her face. The rest of the pre-ceremony passed in a blur of final touches and forced smiles. Vanessa held court in the corner of the room, posing for photos and making sure everyone saw her dress from every angle. My mother hovered nervously, her phone glued to her hand, no doubt fielding texts from relatives and guests who'd already caught wind of what was happening. My father, Robert Harper, appeared briefly in the doorway, took one look at the situation, and immediately retreated without a word. Typical. The ceremony coordinator poked her head in, all business and checklists. We're ready to start lining up, ladies. Bridesmaids, please head to the staging area. My bridesmaids filed out, each of them shooting Vanessa a look that could melt steel. Vanessa just smiled serenely and followed them, her train rustling behind her. Kelsey lingered by the door, waiting until Vanessa was out of earshot before coming back to me. "Nat," she whispered urgently, "what are you doing? You can't just let her get away with this." "I'm not," I said simply. "Just trust me. You remember the plan." Her eyes widened as realization dawned. "Wait. You're actually going to," I smiled, a real smile this time. "It's my wedding day, Kels. And I'm going to make sure everyone remembers it." She stared at me for a long moment, then a slow grin spread across her face. "Oh my God. You're brilliant. Now go," I said, giving her a gentle push toward the door. "I'll see you out there." Alone in the bridal suite, I walked over to the closet where we'd hidden the second garment bag. The one we'd snuck in last week under the guise of storing extra decorations. The one that held the dress nobody knew about except me, Kelsey, and Isabelle Fontaine, the designer who'd worked in secret for months to create it. I unzipped the bag slowly, my heart pounding not with anxiety now, but with anticipation. Inside was a gown that made my current dress look like a practice round. Custom made, hand beaded, worth more than my car and my student loans combined. A dress that had required me to cash in favors, max out a credit card, and convince Isabelle that this was worth her time. And it was. Because this wasn't just about looking beautiful. This was about sending a message. I heard the string quartet start up outside, the opening notes of the processional music drifting through the open windows. My bridesmaids would be walking now, one by one, including Vanessa in her white dress, soaking up every ounce of attention she could get. The guests would be whispering, phones out, already texting their friends about the sister who wore white. And Vanessa would be loving every second of it, convinced she'd won. I carefully stepped out of my first dress, hanging it gently on the hanger. It was a beautiful dress. It deserved better than this day was giving it. Then I reached for the second gown. My phone buzzed. A text from Derek: "Whatever you're planning, I'm with you. I love you." I smiled, typing back quickly, "See you at the altar. Get ready for a show." The music swelled. My cue was coming. I slipped into the custom gown, the fabric falling perfectly into place like it had been designed to fit not just my body, but this exact moment. I checked my reflection one last time. The woman staring back at me wasn't the people pleaser who'd spent her whole life making herself smaller so Vanessa could shine brighter. She was someone new. Someone who'd finally learned that sometimes the only way to win is to play the game better than anyone else. I picked up my bouquet, straightened my shoulders, and walked toward the door. Out there, 200 guests were waiting. My sister was probably already seated, basking in her moment of stolen glory. My mother was likely wringing her hands, worried about what people would say. My father was probably pretending none of this was happening. But none of that mattered anymore. Because in about 60 seconds, I was going to walk down that aisle and remind everyone whose day this actually was. And Vanessa? Vanessa had no idea what was coming. The doors to the chapel opened, and I heard the collective intake of breath before I even stepped into view. The string quartet shifted seamlessly into the bridal march, and I began my walk down the aisle, alone, just as I'd chosen. No father giving me away like property, no symbolic handoff from one man to another. Just me, in a gown that cost more than some people's yearly salary, walking toward the man I'd chosen to marry. The dress caught the afternoon light in ways that seemed almost impossible. Isabelle Fontaine had outdone herself. The bodice was entirely hand-embroidered with crystals and pearls in a pattern that looked like cascading starlight. The skirt was layers upon layers of the finest silk organza, each one catching and reflecting light as I moved, creating an effect that made me look like I was floating. The train stretched behind me for what felt like miles, held by a flower girl who looked absolutely enchanted. But the real showstopper was the back. A completely open back that plunged daringly low, framed by more crystal work that traced down my spine like a river of diamonds. This was not a subtle dress. This was not an appropriate dress. This was a declaration. I watched faces as I passed. Mouths hung open. Some guests had tears in their eyes. Others looked like they'd forgotten to breathe. Phones came out immediately, everyone trying to capture this moment, to be the first to post about what they were witnessing. I saw my Aunt Diane in the third row, her face frozen in what could only be described as shock mixed with grudging admiration. She'd always favored Vanessa, but even she couldn't deny what was happening right now. And then I saw Vanessa. She was seated in the front row where the maid of honor usually sat during the ceremony, and the look on her face was everything I'd hoped for and more. Her smile had vanished. Her confident posture had crumbled. She sat rigid in her white dress that now looked cheap and desperate next to mine, her hands gripping the edges of her seat so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. She'd been upstaged at my own wedding, by me, and she knew it. My mother sat beside her, and the expression on Claire Harper's face was complex. Horror at the expense, certainly. Worry about what people would think, absolutely. But underneath all of that, I caught something else. A flicker of respect, maybe even pride, quickly buried under years of conditioning about propriety and moderation. Derek stood at the altar, and the look in his eyes made everything worth it. He wasn't just seeing a beautiful bride. He was seeing me, really seeing me, perhaps for the first time understanding the woman he was about to marry. Someone who could smile sweetly while burning down everything that tried to diminish her. He mouthed two words, "Holy hell." I reached the altar and handed my bouquet to Kelsey, who was practically vibrating with suppressed glee. She leaned in as she took the flowers and whispered, "You're a legend." The officiant, a kind older gentleman named Reverend Peters, took a moment to compose himself before beginning. He'd clearly not been expecting this level of drama, but he was professional enough to carry on. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Natalie Harper and Derek Lawson in holy matrimony." The ceremony proceeded, but I could feel the energy in the crowd. Nobody was paying attention to the readings or the vows in the traditional sense. They were watching the spectacle, witnessing the power play happening in real time. Every time I moved, the dress caught the light. Every time I smiled at Derek, cameras clicked. I could see Troy, my photographer, moving through the crowd with purpose, capturing every angle, every reaction, every moment of this perfectly orchestrated performance. When it came time for the vows, Derek took my hands in his, and his grip was steady and sure. "Natalie," he began, his voice strong and clear, "I promise to always support you when you stand up for yourself. I promise to be your partner in every battle worth fighting. And I promise to never, ever underestimate you." The crowd let out a collective appreciative sound, and I saw Vanessa flinch. "My turn." "Derek," I said, meeting his eyes, "I promise to love you with the same fierce loyalty you've shown me. I promise to build a life with you based on honesty, not performance. And I promise that what you see is always what you get, no hidden agendas, no games. Just us." It was a pointed statement, and everyone there knew it. Reverend Peters smiled, clearly enjoying this more than he probably should have been. "By the power vested in me by the state of South Carolina, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Derek, you may kiss your bride." Derek pulled me close, dipped me dramatically in a move we'd practiced but that still made the crowd gasp with delight, and kissed me like we were the only two people in the world. The applause was thunderous. As we walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, I caught Vanessa's face one more time. She looked like she'd been slapped. Her white dress now seemed like a costume, a desperate bid for attention that had backfired spectacularly. She'd come to my wedding intending to steal my thunder, and instead, she'd given me the perfect excuse to unleash something she never saw coming. My mother was already on her phone, no doubt trying to manage the narrative before it spiraled beyond her control. Too late for that. By the time we reached the reception venue, the photos were already circulating. I knew because my phone, tucked discreetly in Kelsey's bag, had been buzzing non-stop. We took our formal photos in the gardens, and Troy was in his element. He positioned us by the river, under the old oak trees, against the sunset. Every shot was pure magic, and I knew these images would be everywhere by tomorrow morning. The reception hall at Riverside Estate was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers, tables draped in silk linens, centerpieces that probably cost more than my first car. The room was buzzing with energy when we entered for our grand entrance. The DJ announced us as Mr. and Mrs. Lawson, and the applause was genuine, warm, celebratory. Our first dance was to a song we'd chosen months ago, something classic and romantic, and as Derek spun me around the floor, my dress creating swirls of light and fabric, I felt genuinely happy. Not triumphant, not vindictive. Just happy. This was my wedding. My day. My choice. And nobody had taken that from me. The dinner service began, and I noticed Vanessa sitting at the family table, picking at her food, her earlier confidence completely shattered. She'd barely spoken to anyone since the ceremony. Several relatives had tried to engage her in conversation, but she'd responded with clipped, short answers. Claire kept glancing between us, clearly trying to figure out how to navigate this minefield. Robert, as usual, was pretending nothing unusual had happened, laughing too loudly at someone's joke and drinking his scotch like it was water. Kelsey appeared at my side during a lull between courses. "Nat," she said quietly, urgent but controlled, "we need to talk." I followed her to a quiet corner near the terrace doors, away from the crowd. "What's wrong?" She pulled out her phone and showed me the screen. Social media was exploding. Someone had posted the photos, and they'd gone viral. Hashtags were already trending. The comments ranged from supportive to savage, but they all had one thing in common: they were talking about the sister who wore white and got demolished by the bride's revenge gown. "But that's not the problem," Kelsey continued, scrolling to another post. "Look at this." It was from Vanessa's account. She'd posted a photo of herself in her white dress with a caption that read, "When your sister is so insecure she has to change dresses mid-ceremony to compete with you. Some of us don't need theatrics to shine. Stay classy, Charleston." My stomach dropped. She was trying to spin this, to make me look like the villain, like I was the one who'd overreacted. The comments under her post were mixed. Some people were buying her narrative, calling me petty and dramatic. Others were defending me, pointing out that she was the one who'd worn white in the first place. "This could spiral," I said, my mind racing. "If she controls the story, she wins." Kelsey nodded. "So what do we do?" I thought for a moment, then made a decision. "We tell the truth. All of it. Not just about today, but about everything." She frowned, confused. "What do you mean, everything?" "I mean the pattern," I said, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. "I mean every birthday she ruined, every achievement she overshadowed, every time she made my life about her. If she wants to play the victim, we show everyone who the real victim has been all these years." Kelsey's eyes widened. "Nat, that's nuclear." "Are you sure?" I pulled out my own phone, opened my photo archives, and started scrolling. Photos of past events, screenshots of text messages, social media posts where Vanessa had strategically undermined me. I'd been documenting this my whole life without even realizing it. "I'm sure," I said. "Call Hannah." Hannah Rhodes was a lifestyle and society columnist for Charleston magazine, someone Kelsey had connected me with years ago through work. She was smart, fair, and most importantly, she had a platform. Within 20 minutes, Hannah was at the reception, discreetly meeting us in one of the private rooms off the main hall. She looked professional as always, notebook in hand, but her expression was eager. This had all the makings of a story people would talk about for months. "Walk me through it," Hannah said, settling into a chair. "Everything. Start from the beginning." So I did. I told her about growing up in Vanessa's shadow, about the constant need for attention, the manipulation, the calculated timing of her announcements to overshadow mine. I showed her the receipts. Text messages from Vanessa criticizing my accomplishments while celebrating her own. Social media posts where she'd conveniently scheduled major life updates to coincide with my milestones. Photos from family events where she always positioned herself as the center of attention. Then I told her about today. About specifically asking my bridal party to wear blush pink, about making it crystal clear that white was off limits. About Vanessa showing up anyway in full bridal regalia, about my mother's non-response, about the calculated way she'd played innocent. And finally, about the backup dress, about the decision to reclaim my day on my own terms. Hannah was scribbling notes furiously, occasionally pausing to ask clarifying questions. "This is a pattern of behavior," she said, more statement than question. "This wasn't just about one dress. It never was." "Exactly," I said. "And I'm done pretending it's normal. I'm done making myself smaller so she can feel bigger." Hannah looked up from her notebook, studying me carefully. "You know this will blow up your family, right? Once I publish this, there's no taking it back. Your mother, your father, Vanessa, they're all going to face public scrutiny." I thought about my mother's thin smiles and careful words, always more concerned with appearance than truth. I thought about my father's convenient absences every time conflict arose. I thought about Vanessa's smirk as she walked into my bridal suite in white, knowing exactly what she was doing and not caring. "They made their choices," I said quietly. "I'm just making mine." Hannah nodded slowly, then closed her notebook. "I'll have a draft to you by tonight. We'll publish tomorrow morning. You should prepare yourself for the fallout." I stood, smoothing down my spectacular dress one more time. "I'm ready." When I returned to the reception, Derek was waiting near our table. He pulled me aside immediately. "I heard," he said simply. "Kelsey told me. Are you okay with this?" I looked up at my new husband, this man who'd stood by me through Vanessa's engagement announcement during our first date anniversary, through her convenient crisis on the day we closed on our first home together, through countless moments where my family had made it clear I was the supporting character in their story. "I'm more than okay with it," I said. "I'm free." He kissed my forehead. "Then I'm with you. Whatever happens next, we face it together." The rest of the reception passed in a blur of dancing, toasts, and cake cutting. Vanessa left early, slipping out during the father-daughter dance, which was probably for the best since Robert had made it abundantly clear he wasn't going to dance with me anyway. "Too busy networking with guests," he'd said, as if this were a business conference and not his daughter's wedding. My mother cornered me near the end of the night, her champagne glass clutched tightly in her perfectly manicured hand. "Natalie, we need to discuss what happened today," she began, her voice low and tense. "Do we?" I asked, genuine curiosity in my tone. "Because it seems pretty straightforward to me. Vanessa wore white to my wedding, and I handled it." She winced at my directness. "You didn't handle it. You made a spectacle. People are talking." "Let them talk," I said simply. "They would have talked anyway. At least now they're talking about how beautiful I looked instead of pitying me for having a sister who would wear white to my wedding. That dress," she continued, clearly struggling to maintain her composure, "was excessive. How much did it even cost?" I smiled, taking a sip of my champagne. "More than you'd approve of and less than I'm worth." "Claire," I said, using her first name deliberately, watching her flinch at the familiarity, "I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not explaining myself, I'm not apologizing for taking up space, and I'm not pretending that what Vanessa did was okay just to keep the peace. Today was my wedding day, and I made sure everyone remembered that. If that bothers you, that's something you'll need to work out on your own." She stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language, then turned and walked away without another word. Kelsey appeared at my elbow moments later. "That was ice cold," she said, impressed. "I'm learning," I replied. Derek and I left the reception around midnight, showered in rose petals and well wishes, climbing into the vintage car that would take us to the boutique hotel where we'd spend our wedding night before flying out to Italy for our honeymoon. As we drove away from Riverside Estate, I looked back at the lit-up mansion, at the celebration still going on without us, at the life I was leaving behind. My phone buzzed. A text from Hannah: "Draft is done. It's good. Really good. You sure you want me to run it?" I typed back without hesitation, "Publish it." Derek glanced over at me, then reached across to take my hand. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "Not a single one," I said, squeezing his hand back. For the first time in my life, I meant it. The hotel suite was beautiful, all soft lighting and luxury linens, but I was too wired to sleep. I kept checking my phone, watching the social media storm continue to build. People were choosing sides. Some called me petty and vindictive. Others called me a hero for standing up to family manipulation. The photos of both dresses were being compared, analyzed, dissected. Fashion bloggers were weighing in. Etiquette experts were having heated debates. And through it all, one thing was becoming increasingly clear. I'd started a conversation that went far beyond one wedding. Women were sharing their own stories in the comments. Sisters who overshadowed them, mothers who favored siblings, family members who made every occasion about themselves. The outpouring was overwhelming, and somewhere in the middle of reading through hundreds of comments, I realized this had never been just about me and Vanessa. It was about everyone who'd ever been made to feel small by someone who should have built them up. Derek had fallen asleep, exhausted from the day, but I stayed up for another hour, reading and processing. Around 2 a.m, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello? Natalie. It was Vanessa's voice, tight and strained. We need to talk. I glanced at Derek's sleeping form, then walked quietly to the bathroom, closing the door before responding. It's 2 a.m, Vanessa. What could we possibly need to talk about right now? You humiliated me, she hissed, all pretense of civility gone. You made me look like an idiot in front of everyone. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, suddenly very tired. You wore white to my wedding, Vanessa. What did you think was going to happen? It was just a dress, she snapped. You're so sensitive. You always have been. You can't just let anything go, can you? Everything has to be about you. The irony was so thick I almost laughed. Vanessa, I said, keeping my voice level, I'm going to say this once, and then I'm hanging up. What you did today was deliberate, calculated, and cruel. You knew exactly what you were doing, and you did it anyway because you couldn't stand the idea of me having one day that wasn't about you. Well, guess what? I took my day back. And if that embarrasses you, if that makes you uncomfortable, good. Maybe now you'll understand how I've felt my entire life. She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. Softer, almost pleading. We're family, Nat. You're really going to let one day ruin that? One day? I repeated, incredulous. Vanessa, this isn't about one day. This is about 28 years of you making sure I knew my place. This is about every achievement you diminished, every moment you stole, every time you made me feel like I was asking for too much by simply existing. So no, I'm not letting one day ruin our relationship. You've been doing that all by yourself for decades. I'm just finally done pretending it isn't happening. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but not with anger. With relief. With the profound sense of finally saying the things I'd kept locked inside for so long. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, still in the silk nightgown I'd changed into, my makeup washed off, my hair down. I looked different. Lighter, somehow. Like I'd been carrying a weight I hadn't even realized was there until I'd set it down. When I climbed back into bed, Derek stirred. Everything okay? He mumbled, half asleep. Everything's perfect, I whispered, curling into his warmth. And for once, I actually believed it. Morning came too quickly. We had a flight to catch, a honeymoon in Tuscany waiting for us, 2 weeks of wine and art and no family drama. But first, there was the matter of Hannah's article. It was scheduled to go live at 8 a.m. At 7:45, I was showered, dressed, and sitting on the hotel balcony with coffee and my phone, Derek beside me reading through emails. You ready for this? He asked, glancing over at me. As ready as I'll ever be, I said. At 8 a.m. exactly, my phone exploded. The article was live. The headline read, "The Sister Who Wore White, One Bride's Story of a Lifetime of Being Overshadowed." Hannah had done an incredible job. She'd woven together my personal story with broader themes of family dynamics, favoritism, and the ways women are socialized to accept poor treatment in the name of keeping the peace. She'd included photos, carefully selected to illustrate the pattern without being gratuitous. And she'd included statements from witnesses at the wedding, guests who'd seen what happened and had their own thoughts about it. The response was immediate and massive. Within an hour, the article had been shared thousands of times. News outlets were picking it up. Morning shows were discussing it. The hashtag that had started as wedding gossip had evolved into something bigger, something about standing up to family manipulation and reclaiming your narrative. My phone rang again. This time it was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. She called back immediately. Then again. After the fourth call, I answered. "What, Mom? How could you?" Her voice was shaking with rage. "How could you air our family's private business to the entire world? How could you embarrass us like this?" I stood up, walking to the edge of the balcony, looking out over Charleston's historic district. "You mean how could I tell the truth?" I asked calmly. "Because that's all I did. I told the truth about what it's been like being Vanessa's sister, and apparently, a lot of people relate to that." "You've made us a laughingstock," she said, her voice breaking. "Do you have any idea what people are saying? Your father's business partners are calling, relatives are taking sides, Vanessa is absolutely devastated." "Good," I said, the word coming out more forcefully than I'd intended. Maybe Vanessa should be devastated. Maybe she should feel a fraction of what she's made me feel for years. And maybe you should ask yourself why you're more concerned with how this looks than with how your daughter was treated. There was silence on the other end. Then, in a voice I'd never heard from her before, cold and distant, she said, "Don't bother coming to Sunday dinner. You're not welcome in this family anymore." The line went dead. I stared at my phone for a long moment, processing what had just happened. I'd been disowned. Cast out. Cut off from the family I'd spent my entire life trying to please. And the strangest part? I felt okay. Better than okay, actually. Derek came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "I heard," he said quietly. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be," I said, leaning back against him. "I think she just gave me the best wedding gift she could have. Freedom." Italy was supposed to be an escape, 2 weeks of blissful disconnection from the chaos we'd left behind in Charleston. We'd planned this honeymoon months ago, carefully selecting each destination. Florence for the art, the Amalfi Coast for the beaches, Rome for the history. Derek had even learned a few phrases in Italian, determined to navigate menus and order wine without embarrassing himself. But as our plane touched down in Florence, my phone buzzed back to life after the long flight, and I realized that distance meant nothing in the age of the internet. 73 missed calls. Over 200 text messages. My email inbox had exploded with interview requests from podcasts, news programs, magazines. There were messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, some supportive, others accusatory. Former classmates wanted to share their own stories. Distant relatives were demanding I take down the article. Complete strangers were messaging me on every platform, telling me I was brave or heartless, a hero or a villain, depending on their own family dynamics and personal history. Derek watched me scroll through the notifications, his expression shifting from concern to something harder to read. "You don't have to look at all that right now," he said gently, reaching over to take my hand. "We're on our honeymoon. The world can wait." He was right, of course. But even as we collected our luggage and made our way to the rental car, even as we drove through the Tuscan countryside with its rolling hills and cypress trees, I couldn't stop thinking about what was happening back home. The article had done more than tell my story. It had opened a floodgate, and now thousands of people were pouring their own experiences into that space, using my wedding as a catalyst to examine their own family wounds. We checked into our hotel in Florence, a converted Renaissance palazzo with frescoed ceilings and marble floors that would have taken my breath away under different circumstances. The concierge handed us our room key with a warm smile, welcoming us to Italy in practiced English. Our suite overlooked the Arno River, the Ponte Vecchio visible in the distance, golden in the late afternoon sun. It was romantic and perfect and everything I'd dreamed of, but my mind kept drifting back to Charleston, to the fallout I'd left behind. Derek unpacked while I stood on the balcony, finally allowing myself to read through some of the messages. Kelsey had sent updates throughout our flight. The article had been picked up by national outlets. A morning show wanted me to appear via video call. My mother had apparently showed up at Kelsey's apartment demanding to know how to contact me, and Kelsey, bless her, had told Claire that I was unreachable and to respect my honeymoon. There was a message from Aunt Diane that simply read, "You've always been dramatic. This is why nobody takes you seriously." Another from a cousin I barely knew. Finally someone said it. "Vanessa has been insufferable for years. Watching you take her down was the highlight of my summer." Then there were the messages from Vanessa herself. A dozen of them, each more unhinged than the last. The first few were angry, accusing me of being jealous and petty. Then they shifted to bargaining, asking me to issue a retraction, to make a joint statement, to do anything to make this go away. The most recent one, sent just an hour ago, was different in tone. It was a screenshot of a legal document. She was threatening to sue me for defamation. I stared at the image on my phone, my stomach twisting. Derek came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. "What is it?" he asked quietly. "Vanessa's threatening legal action," I said, my voice flat. "She's claiming I defamed her character." He was quiet for a moment, then gently took the phone from my hands and set it face down on the balcony table. "Nat, listen to me. Everything you said in that article was true. You have documentation, witnesses, years of evidence. She can threaten whatever she wants, but truth is an absolute defense against defamation. Any lawyer worth their retainer will tell her she doesn't have a case." "I know," I said, "but it still feels like she's trying to punish me for finally speaking up." "That's exactly what she's doing," he replied, turning me around to face him. "Because she's losing control of the narrative, and controlling the narrative is all she knows how to do. But you're not backing down. We're not backing down. We're going to enjoy our honeymoon, and when we get back, we'll deal with whatever comes next. Together." I nodded, trying to absorb his certainty, trying to let it steady me. He was right. I'd come this far. There was no point in retreating now. We spent the evening walking through Florence's historic center, getting deliberately lost in the narrow streets, stopping at a small trattoria for dinner where the pasta was handmade and the wine flowed freely. For a few hours, I managed to push everything else aside and just be present. Just be a newlywed on her honeymoon, marveling at centuries-old architecture and laughing at Derek's attempts to pronounce Italian menu items. But that night, back in our hotel room, I couldn't sleep. While Derek dozed beside me, I pulled out my laptop and started digging through the messages more carefully. That's when I found the email from Lauren Price. Lauren and I had been friends since college, though we drifted apart over the years as our lives took different paths. She'd gone into event planning and legal consulting, building a successful business helping people navigate complex family situations around weddings, estates, and inheritance disputes. Her email was brief but pointed. "Nat, I saw the article. I saw Vanessa's threat. Call me when you're back. I think I can help with something you don't even know is a problem yet." I frowned at the screen, reading the message again. Something I didn't know was a problem? What did that mean? I checked the timestamp. She'd sent it 6 hours ago, which meant it was still early evening in Charleston. I shouldn't call. I was on my honeymoon. I should be sleeping, not obsessing over family drama from across the ocean. But my fingers were already dialing her number. She answered on the second ring. "I was hoping you'd call tonight," she said without preamble. "I'm guessing you haven't slept much." "Not really," I admitted, keeping my voice low so I wouldn't wake Derek. "Lauren, what's going on?" "What don't I know?" There was a pause, the sound of papers rustling. "Okay," she said, her tone shifting into what I recognized as her professional mode. "After your article dropped, I did some digging. Professional curiosity, mostly. I wanted to see if there was any legal exposure for you, anything Vanessa could actually use against you. And? I prompted, my heart starting to beat faster. And while I was looking into your family's financial history, I found something interesting. Do you know anything about your grandmother's trust? My grandmother, Eleanor Harper, had passed away 5 years ago. She'd been the family matriarch, a formidable woman who'd built a small fortune through real estate investments and careful financial management. I knew she'd left money to the family, but the details had always been vague. My parents handled all of that, and I'd never questioned it. I know she left some money to all of us, I said slowly. But I don't know the specifics. My parents said it was being managed in a family trust. Lauren made a small sound that might have been skepticism. Right. Well, I managed to pull some public records, and Nat, the trust your grandmother set up was specifically divided into equal portions for her grandchildren. That means you and Vanessa should have received the same amount. But according to the disbursement records I found, that's not what happened. I sat up straighter in bed, my pulse quickening. What do you mean? I mean Vanessa received her full portion 5 years ago. She used it as a down payment on that condo she's always bragging about, the one in the historic district. But you, Lauren continued, her voice tight with controlled anger, you never received anything. At least not according to any records I can find. Your portion appears to have been rolled into something called the Harper Family Operating Fund, which as far as I can tell, your parents control and use for whatever they want. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. That can't be right, I said, even though something deep in my gut told me it absolutely could be right. Why would they do that? Lauren sighed. I can think of a few reasons, none of them good. Maybe they thought Vanessa needed it more. Maybe they planned to give it to you later and just never got around to it. Or maybe, she paused, they simply didn't think you deserved it. The words hit me like a physical blow. How much are we talking about? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Based on the initial trust value and the disbursement to Vanessa, Lauren said carefully, somewhere in the neighborhood of $350,000. I couldn't breathe. $350,000. Money that was legally mine, money that my grandmother had specifically designated for me, had been taken and used by my parents without my knowledge or consent. While Vanessa bought her condo and posted pictures of her perfect life, I'd been scraping by, taking out loans, working multiple jobs to build my graphic design business from the ground. Nat? Lauren's voice pulled me back. You still there? I'm here, I managed. Lauren, are you sure about this? Is there any chance you're wrong? I pulled certified copies of the trust documents, she said. I can email them to you right now if you want. But yes, I'm sure. And Nat, this isn't just unethical. Depending on how the trust was structured and what your parents did with the money, this could be illegal. It could be embezzlement or breach of fiduciary duty at minimum. You could have grounds for legal action. I sat there in the darkness of our Italian hotel room, listening to my husband's steady breathing beside me, trying to process what I was hearing. My parents had stolen from me. There was no other word for it. They'd taken money that was rightfully mine and given it to my sister, or used it for themselves, and they'd done it without ever telling me it existed in the first place. Send me everything, I said quietly. Every document you have. Lauren, I need to know exactly what they did and how they did it. You've got it, she replied. I'll send it all over in the next hour. Nat, I know you're on your honeymoon, and I'm sorry to drop this on you now. But given that Vanessa's threatening legal action, I thought you should know that you have your own ammunition if you need it. This goes way beyond a sister wearing white to your wedding. This is systematic financial abuse. Thank you, I said, meaning it. I'll look at everything when you send it. And Lauren? Keep digging. If they did this once, I want to know if there's more. I'm already on it, she said. Get some sleep if you can. We'll talk when you're back. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the moonlight reflecting off the Arno River, trying to reconcile the family I'd grown up with and the people they were revealing themselves to be. I'd always known they favored Vanessa. That had been obvious my entire life. But I'd told myself it was just garden variety favoritism, the kind of thing that happens in families with strong personalities and limited emotional bandwidth. This was different. This was calculated. This was theft. My laptop chimed softly with Lauren's email. I opened it, downloading file after file. Trust documents, disbursement records, bank statements, legal filings. The paper trail was extensive and damning. My grandmother had been explicit in her wishes. Equal portions for both granddaughters, to be distributed upon her death or when they reached the age of 25, whichever came later. I'd been 26 when she died, well past the threshold. The money should have come to me immediately. Instead, according to the documents Lauren had found, my father, as the executor of the trust, had petitioned the court for permission to consolidate my portion into the family operating fund, claiming it would be better managed that way until I demonstrated greater financial responsibility. The petition included statements about my struggling business, my student loan debt, my lack of stable income at the time. All technically true, but presented in a way that made me sound incompetent rather than simply young and building a career. The judge had approved it. Why wouldn't they? My own father was arguing that I couldn't be trusted with my inheritance, and there was no one there to argue otherwise because I hadn't even known the hearing was happening. Vanessa's portion had been distributed without any such concerns about her financial responsibility, despite the fact that she'd been between jobs at the time and had a credit card debt that she'd complained about constantly. The double standard was staggering. I read through every document twice, then a third time, making notes, highlighting sections, building a timeline. By the time Derek stirred awake as the sun rose over Florence, I had a complete picture of what had been done to me, and I was absolutely furious. Morning, he mumbled, reaching over and finding my side of the bed cold. How long have you been up? All night, I said, not turning away from my laptop. Derek, we need to talk. He sat up immediately, suddenly alert, reading the tone in my voice. What happened? I told him everything. About Lauren's call, about the trust, about the money that should have been mine but was instead taken and used by my parents while I struggled. About the legal petition that painted me as financially irresponsible, about the judge who signed off on it without my knowledge, about the $350,000 that could have changed my life but that I never even knew existed. Derek listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. When I finally finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, very calmly, we're going to destroy them. Not just Vanessa. All of them. I looked at him, this man I'd married just days ago, and saw something fierce and protective in his eyes that made me fall in love with him all over again. I don't want to spend our honeymoon plotting revenge, I said softly. Yes, you do, he replied without hesitation. And I want to help. This isn't about the wedding anymore, Nat. This is about your parents stealing from you and then making you feel like you were the problem. So yes, we're going to enjoy Florence and the Amalfi Coast and Rome. We're going to eat incredible food and drink amazing wine and make love in beautiful hotel rooms. But we're also going to spend some time making sure that when we get back to Charleston, we're ready to burn their entire world down. We spent that day walking through the Uffizi Gallery, standing in front of Botticelli's Birth of Venus and Caravaggio's dramatic shadows, but my mind was elsewhere. I was thinking about the trust documents, about what else might be hidden, about how deep this betrayal might go. That evening, over dinner at a rooftop restaurant with a view of the Duomo, I finally asked Derek the question that had been haunting me all day. Do you think they ever loved me? Not the way they should have, he said immediately. Real love doesn't look like what they've given you. Real love doesn't steal from you and then gaslight you about your worth. I pushed my pasta around my plate, appetite gone. I keep trying to figure out when it started. When did I become the disposable one? When did they decide Vanessa mattered more? Derek reached across the table and took my hand. Maybe it was never a decision. Maybe it was always just who they were, and you spent your whole life trying to earn something they were never capable of giving. That's the real tragedy here. Not what they did, but all the years you wasted thinking you could change it. We flew to the Amalfi Coast 2 days later, trading Florence's Renaissance grandeur for Positano's cliffside charm. Our hotel clung to the mountainside, our room a cascade of white linens and ocean views. It should have been paradise, and in many ways it was. We swam in the Mediterranean, hiked the path of the gods, ate fresh seafood at restaurants that had been family-run for generations. But every night, I was back on my laptop, corresponding with Lauren as she uncovered more and more. She'd found irregularities in my parents' tax filings, questions about how they'd reported the trust distribution. She discovered that the Harper family operating fund had been used to finance Vanessa's graduate school tuition, to cover the down payment on my parents' beach house, to fund my father's business expansion. My money had been supporting their lifestyle for 5 years while I'd been building my business from nothing, taking on debt, wondering why success seemed to come so easily to everyone else in my family. Lauren also found something else. A clause in the trust that said if I ever discovered the misappropriation and wanted to contest it, I had 7 years from the date of my grandmother's death to file a legal claim. We were 5 years in. That meant I had 2 years left, but it also meant that time was not unlimited. If I was going to do something about this, I needed to act relatively soon. The question was whether I wanted to take on that fight, whether the money was worth the complete destruction of whatever remained of my family relationships. I called Kelsey from a quiet spot on our hotel's terrace while Derek was in the shower. She answered immediately, her voice bright and eager. "How's Italy? Are you having the most romantic time? Tell me everything." "It's beautiful," I said, and I meant it. "But Kels, something's happened. I need to tell you about my grandmother's trust." I walked her through everything Lauren had discovered, and with each revelation, Kelsey's responses grew more incredulous and outraged. 350,000? Your own inheritance? Nat, that's not favoritism. That's theft. That's fraud. I know, I said quietly. The question is what I do about it. What do you mean, what do you do about it? Kelsey's voice was sharp. You sue them. You file charges if you can. You take back what's yours and you make sure they can't do this to anyone else. But they're still my parents, I said, even though the words felt hollow. Once I do this, there's no going back. The family is over. She was quiet for a moment. Then, gently, she said, Nat, honey, the family was over the moment they chose to steal from you. You're just acknowledging what they already did. You're not the one breaking the family. They are. You're just refusing to pretend anymore. Her words settled into my chest, heavy and true. She was right. I hadn't broken anything. I was simply refusing to carry the weight of their choices any longer. When Derek and I finally returned to Charleston 2 weeks later, tanned and rested but carrying a very different energy than we'd left with, I felt ready. Not excited, not vengeful, just ready. Ready to face what needed to be faced, to do what needed to be done, to stop protecting people who had never protected me. Our flight landed on a Tuesday afternoon, and by Wednesday morning, I was sitting in Lauren's office downtown, surrounded by documents and evidence, planning the next phase of what had started as a wedding revenge story and had evolved into something much bigger. Lauren had assembled everything meticulously. Bank records, trust documents, email correspondence, even testimony from the lawyer who'd originally drafted my grandmother's trust, confirming that equal distribution had been Eleanor's explicit and strongly stated wish. This is solid, Lauren said, tapping the stack of papers on her desk. More than solid. If you want to pursue this legally, you have grounds for a civil suit at minimum. Breach of fiduciary duty, embezzlement, possibly even fraud depending on how the prosecutor's office sees it. And that's not even counting the emotional distress and the financial harm from lost investment opportunities over 5 years. What are we talking about in terms of damages? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. With interest, lost opportunity costs, and punitive damages if we can prove intentional wrongdoing, Lauren said carefully, you could be looking at close to $700,000. Maybe more. I felt dizzy. That wasn't just money. That was a house. That was financial security. That was everything I'd worked for over the past 5 years, handed to me in a lump sum that should have been mine from the beginning. And my parents? I asked quietly. What happens to them if we do this? Lauren leaned back in her chair, her expression serious. Professionally? Your father could lose his real estate license if there's evidence of financial malfeasance. His business could take a major hit. Socially? In Charleston? Claire and Robert Harper would be pariahs. Nobody in their circle would touch them. And Vanessa? She didn't break any laws, Lauren said, but she benefited from ones your parents did break. If it comes out that she knew about the unequal distribution and said nothing, she'll be seen as complicit. Her reputation won't recover. I sat with that for a long moment, imagining the fallout. My father's business collapsing. My mother's social standing destroyed. Vanessa's carefully curated image revealed as a fraud built on stolen money. It would be complete annihilation. It would be justice. Do it, I said, meeting Lauren's eyes. File everything. I want every legal avenue pursued. I want a full accounting of what they took and what they did with it. And Lauren? I want this public. I don't want sealed settlements or quiet agreements. I want everyone to know exactly what they did. She nodded slowly, a small smile playing at her lips. You're sure? Because once we file, there's no containing this. Given how much attention your wedding story got, this will be everywhere. I'm sure, I said. They taught me to stay quiet and accept whatever scraps they threw me. It's time they learned what happens when you push someone too far. Lauren pulled out her phone and started making calls. Within an hour, we had a meeting scheduled with a litigation attorney who specialized in trust disputes. By the end of the day, we'd filed a formal complaint with the probate court and sent notification letters to my parents and their attorney. The wheels were in motion, and there was no stopping them now. That night, Derek and I sat on the couch in our apartment, takeout containers spread across the coffee table, and just breathed. You okay? He asked, studying my face. I thought about it, really thought about it. Was I okay? I just launched legal action against my own parents. I'd set in motion a chain of events that would likely destroy what remained of my family. I'd chosen myself over them, my truth over their secrets, my future over their comfort. Yeah, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. I really am. The response came faster than I expected. 72 hours after we filed the complaint, a courier delivered a thick envelope to our apartment. Inside was a letter from Thompson Legal Group, one of Charleston's oldest and most expensive law firms. My parents had hired the kind of attorney you bring in when you're either very guilty or very rich, or in their case, both. The letter was exactly what I'd anticipated, a mix of outrage and legal threats wrapped in formal language that essentially boiled down to how dare you embarrass this family with baseless accusations. Derek read it over my shoulder, his hand resting on my back. They're calling it a misunderstanding, he said, his voice dry with sarcasm. A misunderstanding that lasted 5 years and involved hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's quite the oversight. I set the letter down on our kitchen counter and reached for my phone. I needed to call Lauren, but before I could dial, my phone started ringing. My father's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the decline button. Answer it, Derek said quietly. You might as well hear what he has to say. Put it on speaker. I accepted the call and immediately switched to speaker mode. Robert Harper's voice filled our small kitchen, tight with barely controlled fury. Natalie. What the hell do you think you're doing? Hello to you too, Dad, I said, keeping my voice level. I'm sitting in my apartment, enjoying my evening. What can I do for you? Don't play games with me, he snapped. You filed a lawsuit against your mother and me. Your own parents. Over money you were never entitled to in the first place. That's interesting, I replied calmly. Because according to the trust documents my attorney obtained, I was very much entitled to that money. Grandmother was quite clear about her wishes. Equal distribution to both granddaughters. Seems straightforward to me. Your grandmother didn't understand your situation, Robert said, his tone shifting to something that might have passed for reasonable if you didn't know him. You were floundering back then, Natalie. Failed business ventures, debt, no stability. We made the responsible choice to manage that money until you demonstrated you could handle it. Failed business ventures, I repeated slowly. You mean the graphic design company I built from nothing, the one that now has clients across 3 states and generates 6 figures annually? That failed business venture? And as for demonstrating financial responsibility, how exactly was I supposed to do that when you never told me the money existed in the first place? There was a pause. I could hear him breathing, that particular pattern he had when he was trying to control his temper. This is what happens, he said finally, when you marry someone who puts ideas in your head. That boy has turned you against your family. Derek's jaw clenched, but he stayed silent, letting me handle this. That boy is my husband, I said, ice creeping into my voice. His name is Derek, and he didn't put any ideas in my head. He just supported me when I found out my parents had been stealing from me for 5 years. There's a difference. We didn't steal anything, Robert's voice rose. That money was managed appropriately. Every cent was accounted for and used for family purposes. Family purposes, I said. Like Vanessa's condo down payment? Like your beach house? Like financing your business expansion? Because I don't recall benefiting from any of those family purposes, Dad. I was taking out loans while you were spending my inheritance on everyone but me. The line went quiet for a moment, and when my father spoke again, his voice had changed. Lower, more dangerous. If you continue with this lawsuit, you will regret it. We will fight you on every single point. We will drag this out for years. We will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of daughter turns on her own family for money. Go ahead, I said simply. Because my attorney has already prepared statements for the press explaining exactly what kind of parents steal from their child and then threaten her when she asks for it back. I'm not the one who should be worried about public opinion here. You ungrateful little, he started, but I cut him off. I'm done with this conversation. Have your attorney contact mine. And Dad? Don't call me again unless it's to apologize. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, adrenaline flooding my system. Derek pulled me into his arms, and I let myself lean into him, drawing strength from his steady presence. You did good, he murmured into my hair. You didn't back down. I know, I said, my voice muffled against his chest. So why do I feel like I might throw up? Because standing up to people who spent your whole life making you feel small is terrifying, he said. But you're doing it anyway. That's what matters. The next few days were a blur of legal maneuvering and escalating tensions. Lauren filed motions, my parents' attorneys filed countermotions. Depositions were scheduled. Financial records were subpoenaed. The machinery of the legal system ground forward with agonizing slowness, but it was moving, and that was something. Then the story leaked. I don't know who talked, whether it was someone at the courthouse or one of my parents' friends trying to control the narrative, but suddenly the local news was running segments about the Harper family trust dispute. Charleston Society magazine, the same publication that had run Hannah's article about my wedding, published a follow-up piece connecting the dots. The bride who'd been upstaged by her sister in white now revealed to have been financially exploited by her entire family. It was a narrative people couldn't resist, and it spread like wildfire through Charleston's social circles and beyond. My phone became unusable, flooded with calls and messages from reporters, from people I'd gone to high school with, from distant relatives taking sides. Kelsey showed up at my apartment one evening with wine and takeout, barricading herself in with me and Derek to provide moral support. This is insane, she said, scrolling through social media on her phone. People are camped outside your parents' house. There are photographers following Vanessa. Someone started a hashtag. I groaned, dropping my head into my hands. What hashtag? She grimaced. Justice for Natalie. It's trending. I looked up at her, then at Derek, then burst out laughing. It wasn't funny, not really, but the absurdity of it all, the way a wedding dress and a stolen inheritance had somehow become a national conversation, was too much. Justice for Natalie, I repeated, shaking my head. My grandmother would have loved this. She always said the Harper family took itself too seriously. Kelsey grinned. She also would have been furious about what they did with her money. Your grandmother was fierce. She'd want you fighting back. That night, after Kelsey left and Derek had fallen asleep, I found myself going through old photo albums. Pictures of family holidays, birthday parties, graduations. In every photo, the pattern was visible once you knew to look for it. Vanessa front and center, my parents flanking her. Me off to the side, slightly out of focus, easy to crop out. There was one photo from my college graduation. I'd earned honors, graduated with a portfolio that had already landed me 2 job offers. But in the picture, taken at the celebratory dinner afterward, my mother and Vanessa were deep in conversation, laughing about something. My father was checking his phone. And I was at the end of the table, holding my diploma, smiling for a camera that was pointed somewhere else. I'd looked at this photo 100 times over the years and never really seen it. Never let myself see it. But now I couldn't look away from what it revealed. This hadn't started with the trust. This had been my entire life. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late September. Lauren had warned me that it would be brief, just a procedural step to determine if there was enough evidence to proceed to a full trial. But even that brief appearance meant facing my parents in person for the first time since I'd filed the lawsuit. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a navy suit that made me look professional and serious. Derek wore his best suit, and together we looked like we meant business. Lauren met us outside the courthouse, her leather briefcase in hand and her expression all confidence. "They're going to try to intimidate you," she said as we climbed the steps. "Robert will probably glare. Claire will likely cry. It's all theater. Remember, we have the evidence on our side. Just stay calm and let me do the talking." The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, wood-paneled and formal. My parents were already seated at the defendant's table with their attorney, Malcolm Thompson, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd stepped out of a legal drama. My mother kept her eyes straight ahead, refusing to look at me. My father, true to Lauren's prediction, fixed me with a stare that would have made me wilt a year ago. Now it just made me sit up straighter. The judge entered, and we all rose. Judge Patricia Winters was a black woman in her 60s with an expression that suggested she'd heard every excuse and wasn't impressed by any of them. She settled into her chair and reviewed the documents in front of her. "This is a preliminary hearing in the matter of Harper versus Harper and Harper," she said, her voice carrying easily through the small room. "I've reviewed the complaint and the initial response. Ms. Price, you represent the plaintiff?" Lauren stood. "Yes, Your Honor. We're alleging breach of fiduciary duty and misappropriation of trust assets." The defendant, Robert Harper, was the executor of his mother Eleanor Harper's trust, which explicitly directed equal distribution of assets to both granddaughters. Instead, he consolidated the plaintiff's portion into a discretionary family fund and distributed those assets unequally, primarily benefiting the plaintiff's sister and his own interests. Judge Winters nodded, making notes. "And Mr. Thompson, your client's position?" Malcolm Thompson rose, all practiced gravitas. "Your Honor, my clients categorically deny any wrongdoing. The trust assets were managed prudently and in accordance with the broad discretionary powers granted to Mr. Harper as executor. The plaintiff was experiencing financial difficulties at the time, and the decision to delay distribution was made in her best interest. Furthermore, she has benefited indirectly from the family fund through various means over the years." The judge looked at him over her reading glasses. "Benefited indirectly in what way?" Thompson shuffled his papers. "Holiday gifts, family dinners, occasional financial assistance with small expenses." I felt Lauren tense beside me, and I understood why. They were actually trying to argue that birthday presents and the occasional dinner counted as distributing my $350,000 inheritance. Judge Winters seemed to have the same thought. "Mr. Thompson," she said dryly, Are you seriously arguing that holiday gifts constitute proper distribution of a trust asset worth hundreds of thousands of dollars? When you put it that way, Your Honor, it does sound somewhat insufficient, he admitted, and I caught a flicker of doubt cross his face. The judge returned her attention to the documents. Ms. Price, you've submitted bank records and correspondence showing unequal distribution? We have, Your Honor, Lauren said crisply. We can demonstrate that the plaintiff's sister received her full distribution immediately, while the plaintiff received nothing. We can also show that assets from the plaintiff's portion were used for purposes that exclusively benefited other family members, including the sister's property purchase and the parents' business investments. None of these uses were disclosed to the plaintiff, and she was given no opportunity to consent or object. The judge was quiet for a moment, reading through the submissions. Then she looked up at my father. Mr. Harper, did you inform your daughter that she was entitled to assets under her grandmother's trust? My father stood, his posture rigid. Your Honor, the situation was complicated. My daughter was struggling financially, and I felt it was my responsibility as her father and as the executor to protect her from making poor decisions. I was acting in her best interest. That wasn't the question, Judge Winters said sharply. Did you inform her, yes or no? There was a long pause. No, my father finally said. I did not inform her directly. Judge Winters made a note, her expression unreadable. And in the 5 years since the trust was settled, how many times did you discuss this trust or its assets with your daughter? Never, my father admitted, and even from where I sat, I could see him realize how damning that sounded. The judge sat back in her chair. Here's what I'm seeing, she said. A trust with explicit instructions for equal distribution. An executor who unilaterally decided to deviate from those instructions without informing the beneficiary. Assets used for purposes that primarily benefited other parties. And a pattern of non-disclosure that lasted for years. Mr. Thompson, I'm not sure how you're going to explain this away, but I'm certainly interested to see you try. Thompson stood again, his confidence visibly shaken. Your Honor, we believe that when all the facts are examined in proper context, it will be clear that my clients acted reasonably under difficult circumstances. We request time to provide a more complete accounting and to explore potential settlement discussions. The judge looked at Lauren. Ms. Price? My client is willing to participate in mediation, Your Honor, but she's also prepared to proceed to trial if necessary. The evidence is clear, and we're confident in our case. Very well, Judge Winters said. I'm granting the motion to proceed to discovery. Both parties will participate in court-ordered mediation within 30 days. If that fails, we'll schedule a trial date. She looked directly at my father, and her expression hardened. Mr. Harper, I suggest you and your counsel take a hard look at the facts of this case. Because from where I'm sitting, you have significant exposure here, both civil and potentially criminal. We're adjourned. The gavel came down, and suddenly people were moving, gathering papers, speaking in hushed voices. My parents left quickly, Malcolm Thompson ushering them out a side door without a word to us. Lauren turned to me with a satisfied smile. That went better than I expected. Did you see his face when the judge asked about criminal exposure? I nodded, still processing everything. What happens now? Now we wait for them to panic, she said simply. That judge basically told them they're going to lose. Thompson knows it, your parents know it. They're going to come to the mediation ready to settle. The question is what you want. Do you want the money, or do you want to push this all the way and watch them face consequences? Can I have both? I asked, only half joking. Derek squeezed my hand. Let's get out of here, he said. You need food and probably a drink. We went to a quiet restaurant near the waterfront, one of those places where the tables are far enough apart that you can have a private conversation. Over fish and wine that I barely tasted, we discussed options. Lauren laid them out methodically. If we settle, you get the money, probably with interest and penalties. They agree to a payment plan or a lump sum, depending on their liquidity. You sign an NDA, they sign an admission of wrongdoing, and it's over. Clean, fast, profitable. And if we go to trial? I asked. Then it gets messy, she said honestly. Discovery will reveal everything, every financial transaction, every family secret. It'll take months, maybe over a year. The emotional toll will be significant. But, she added, leaning forward, if we win, and we will win, the judgment will be public record. Your parents will face real consequences. There could be criminal referrals. Their reputations will be destroyed beyond repair. And you'll have proof, legal proof, that you were right about everything. I looked at Derek. What do you think? He considered for a moment. I think you need to do whatever lets you sleep at night. If taking the money and moving on is what gives you peace, do that. If you need to see this through to the bitter end for your own closure, I'll support that too. This isn't about what I want. It's about what you need. I turned to Lauren. Set up the mediation. But I want you to go in with a number that reflects not just the money they took, but the opportunity cost, the emotional damage, everything. And I want a full admission of wrongdoing, not some vague acknowledgement. I want them to say in writing that they deliberately withheld my inheritance and used it for their own benefit. And if they won't agree to that? Then we go to trial, I said firmly. Because you're right, this isn't just about money anymore. It's about the truth finally being told. The mediation was scheduled for 3 weeks later in a neutral conference room at a downtown office building. Those 3 weeks were among the longest of my life. My parents' attorney tried multiple times to negotiate through Lauren, feeling out what we'd accept, testing our resolve. Each time, Lauren held firm. Full accounting, full repayment with interest and damages, written admission, or we see them in court. Social media continued to churn. Someone had discovered the court records and posted them online, and suddenly everyone had an opinion about what the Harper family had done. Some people defended my parents, saying I was being vindictive and greedy. But the majority seemed to understand what this was really about. Betrayal, favoritism, a lifetime of being treated as less than. Vanessa stayed silent through all of it, which was perhaps the most telling thing of all. The day of mediation arrived. Derek and I dressed like we were going to war, which in a way, we were. Lauren met us in the building lobby, and together we rode the elevator to the 10th floor. The conference room was sterile and professional, a long table with chairs on either side and a mediator, an older man named Richard Cross, already seated at the head. My parents arrived shortly after us, looking diminished somehow. My father's face was drawn, the confident swagger I'd known my whole life replaced with something that looked almost like fear. My mother had been crying, her makeup not quite covering the redness around her eyes. Vanessa wasn't with them. She declined to participate, which surprised no one. Mr. Cross introduced himself and explained the mediation process. This is a confidential proceeding. Everything said here stays here unless we reach an agreement. My goal is to help both parties find a resolution without going to trial. Let's begin by having each side present their position. Ms. Price? Lauren opened her briefcase and began methodically laying out the case. The trust documents, the bank records, the correspondence showing how my portion had been used. She spoke for 20 minutes, building an airtight argument that left no room for doubt or excuses. When she finished, the room was silent. Mr. Thompson? Cross prompted. Thompson cleared his throat. Your Honor, we acknowledge that in hindsight, some decisions regarding the trust management could have been handled differently. However, my clients acted with what they believed were good intentions, trying to protect their daughter from financial missteps. They're prepared to make Natalie whole, to return the principal amount with reasonable interest, in exchange for confidentiality and a mutual agreement to move forward. Lauren looked at me, and I gave a slight nod. She turned back to Thompson. That's insufficient. We want full repayment including opportunity costs based on conservative investment returns over 5 years. We want damages for emotional distress. And we want a written admission that the executor knowingly and deliberately withheld assets from the beneficiary without disclosure or consent. Non-negotiable. My father's face flushed red. You want me to admit I'm a criminal? I want you to admit you're a thief, I said, speaking for the first time since we'd entered the room. Because that's what you are, Dad. You stole from me. Call it whatever makes you feel better, but that's the truth. Natalie, my mother said, her voice trembling, please. We can work this out as a family. You don't need to be so cruel. Cruel? I repeated, staring at her. Mom, you watched them give Vanessa everything while I got nothing, and you said nothing. You knew about the trust, you knew what was happening, and you chose to protect her and leave me in the dark. And now you want to talk about cruelty? I'm not the one who's been cruel here. I'm just the one who's finally done accepting it. The mediation continued for another 3 hours. Numbers were proposed and rejected. Language was debated. My parents' attorney tried every angle, but Lauren held firm on our core demands. Finally, as the afternoon sun slanted through the conference room windows, my father broke. Fine, he said, his voice rough. We'll agree to your terms. All of them. Just end this. The relief on Thompson's face was palpable. He immediately began drafting the settlement agreement, incorporating all the points we'd insisted on. While he worked, an awkward silence filled the room. My mother kept glancing at me like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. My father stared at the table, his shoulders slumped in defeat. When the agreement was finally ready, we all signed. Multiple copies, initialed on every page, notarized by Mr. Cross. My parents agreed to pay $720,000 in total, representing the original inheritance plus interest, lost investment opportunity, and damages. They admitted in writing that they had deliberately withheld trust assets and used them for purposes not authorized by the beneficiary. And they agreed to a mutual non-disparagement clause, which meant they couldn't publicly attack me without triggering penalty clauses. As I signed my name on the final page, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't victory exactly. It was closure. It was validation. It was proof that I hadn't been crazy or ungrateful or unreasonable all those years. I'd been right, and now there was a legal document that said so. My parents left without a word, Thompson shepherding them out quickly. When the conference room door closed behind them, I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for weeks. It's done, Lauren said, gathering the signed documents. You did it, Nat. You really did it. I looked at Derek, then at Lauren, then down at the settlement agreement with my parents' signatures next to mine. I did, I said quietly. I really did. The first payment hit my account 2 weeks later. $300,000, the initial installment of the settlement. The remaining amount would come in structured payments over the next 18 months, secured by a lien on my parents' beach house. I stared at the number on my banking app for a solid 5 minutes, watching it sit there like it might disappear if I looked away. This was real money. Life-changing money. Money that had always been mine but had taken a lawsuit and months of fighting to actually receive. Derek found me sitting at our kitchen table, laptop open, just staring at the screen. You okay? He asked, settling into the chair beside me. I don't know, I admitted. I thought I'd feel different. Triumphant or vindicated or something. But mostly I just feel tired. He reached over and closed the laptop gently. You've been fighting for months, Nat, fighting your family, fighting the legal system, fighting to be heard and believed. You're allowed to be exhausted. The question is, what do you want to do now? I thought about that for a long moment. What I wanted was complicated. Part of me wanted to do something dramatic with the money, something that would make a statement. Buy a house that was nicer than my parents', take a trip that would make Vanessa's Instagram look pathetic, invest in something flashy that would show everyone I'd won. But the more I sat with those impulses, the more I realized they were just echoes of old patterns. Trying to prove my worth through external validation, competing for attention I shouldn't have to fight for. I want to use it wisely, I finally said. Pay off my business loans, invest in the company, maybe buy us a real house instead of renting this apartment. And I want to put some aside for the future, for kids if we have them, for security. I want it to actually change our lives, not just be revenge money I blow trying to prove a point. Derek smiled. That sounds perfect. Boring and responsible and perfect. We spent the weekend meeting with a financial advisor, setting up investment accounts, running numbers on mortgages. It was decidedly unglamorous, but there was something deeply satisfying about it. This money was finally doing what it should have done 5 years ago. It was giving me options, security, a foundation to build on. By Monday, we'd made offers on 2 different houses, both in neighborhoods my parents would consider beneath them, which somehow made them more appealing. The social fallout, meanwhile, was still unfolding. The settlement agreement included confidentiality clauses, which meant neither side could discuss the specific terms publicly. But the existence of the lawsuit and its resolution were public record, and Charleston's gossip mill was working overtime. I heard through various channels that my parents had quietly withdrawn from several social organizations, citing health concerns and the need to focus on family. Translation: they'd been asked to step back because their presence had become awkward for everyone involved. My father's business had lost 3 major clients, all citing vague concerns about ethical practices. My mother had been conspicuously absent from her usual charity galas and garden club meetings. Vanessa was dealing with her own consequences. Someone had connected the dots publicly, posting a detailed timeline showing how she'd received her inheritance immediately while I'd received nothing, how she'd bought her condo with what was effectively stolen money, how she'd remained silent through it all. Her social media, once a carefully curated showcase of her perfect life, had become a battlefield of comments she couldn't control. She'd eventually made everything private and stopped posting altogether. I should have felt more satisfaction about that. Instead, I mostly felt a dull sort of pity. Vanessa had spent so long being the favorite that she'd never developed into someone who could stand on her own merit. Take away the preferential treatment and the stolen advantages, and there wasn't much left. Kelsey came over one evening with champagne and news. "You're never going to believe who called me today," she said, settling onto our couch with the kind of grin that meant good gossip was coming. "Who?" "Your Aunt Diane." I raised my eyebrows. "The same Aunt Diane who sent me a message calling me dramatic?" "That's the one," Kelsey confirmed. "Apparently she's had a change of heart. She wanted me to pass along a message that she understands now why you did what you did, and she thinks your parents got what they deserved." I laughed, shaking my head. "Let me guess. She's on the outs with them now and wants to make sure she's on the winning side?" Kelsey raised her glass in a mock toast. "You know your family well. But hey, at least some people are capable of admitting they were wrong." I clinked my glass against hers. "I'll take it. Though I'm not rushing to have Sunday dinner with Aunt Diane anytime soon." The reality was that I'd lost my immediate family, but I'd gained something more valuable. Clarity. For the first time in my life, I understood exactly where I stood. There was no more confusion about why I felt overlooked or dismissed. No more wondering if I was being too sensitive or asking for too much. The legal proceedings had provided black and white proof that my perceptions had been accurate all along. I wasn't the problem. I'd never been the problem. That knowledge settled into my bones like bedrock, solid and unshakable. It changed how I moved through the world, how I handled my business, how I interacted with people. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped qualifying my achievements. I stopped waiting for permission to be confident. My graphic design business, which had been doing well before, suddenly exploded. Part of it was the publicity. I'd become somewhat famous as the bride who fought back, and people wanted to work with someone who had that kind of backbone. But part of it was me. I was pitching bigger clients, charging what I was actually worth, walking away from projects that didn't serve me. Within 3 months, I'd doubled my revenue and hired 2 junior designers to help handle the workload. Derek got a promotion at his architecture firm, partially because of his own merit but also, he admitted with a laugh, because suddenly everyone knew who he was and wanted to work with the guy married to that woman from the news. We bought a house in Hampton Park, a beautiful craftsman with original hardwood floors and a garden where we could actually imagine raising kids someday. It needed work, but it was ours, paid for with money I'd rightfully earned and money I'd rightfully reclaimed. The first Christmas after the settlement was strange. For the first time in my life, I had no invitation to the Harper family celebration. No obligation to show up and pretend everything was fine, no performance required. Derek and I spent it with Kelsey and a few close friends, cooking an elaborate meal that was more about the process than the result, drinking too much wine, playing board games until midnight. It was simple and warm and completely free of tension, and I realized this was what holidays were supposed to feel like. On Christmas morning, Derek handed me a small box wrapped in silver paper. Inside was a delicate necklace with a single pendant, a tiny phoenix rising from flames. For the woman who burned it all down and rose from the ashes, he said softly. I love you for your courage, your strength, and your absolutely terrifying ability to hold a grudge. I laughed through sudden tears, fastening the necklace around my neck. It's not a grudge if you're right, I said. It's just being factually accurate about who people are. In February, I got an unexpected letter. It was from my grandmother's sister, my great-aunt Margaret, someone I'd met maybe twice in my entire life at family funerals. She was elderly now, living in a retirement community in North Carolina, but her handwriting was still sharp and precise. The letter was brief but impactful. She wrote that she'd heard about the lawsuit through family channels, and she wanted me to know that she'd witnessed the favoritism toward Vanessa my entire life. She'd argued with my parents about it multiple times over the years, she wrote, and had eventually been frozen out of the family for speaking up. She was proud of me for demanding what was mine, and she hoped I knew that my grandmother Eleanor would have been furious about what had been done with her trust. She enclosed a photo I'd never seen before. It was of my grandmother holding me as a baby, looking down at me with an expression of such pure love and pride that it made my chest ache. On the back, in my grandmother's handwriting, it said, Natalie Grace, my little fighter. Never let them dim your light. I cried for an hour after reading that letter, grieving for the grandmother who'd seen something special in me, who'd tried to provide for my future, only to have her wishes ignored and her resources stolen. But I also felt a deep sense of connection to her, a feeling that she was somehow proud of what I'd done. That in fighting for myself, I'd also been fighting for her memory and her intentions. I had the photo framed and hung it in my home office, a reminder of where I came from and who I was fighting for. In March, I got a call from a producer at a major streaming service. They were developing a limited series about family conflicts and wealth, and they wanted to option my story. The money they were offering was absurd, the kind of number that made the settlement look modest. I talked it over with Derek and Lauren, weighing the pros and cons. It would mean reliving everything again, opening up the story to millions of viewers, inviting even more scrutiny and attention. But it would also mean controlling the narrative completely, showing the full context, potentially helping other people recognize similar patterns in their own families. In the end, I said yes. Not for the money, though that was certainly nice. But because stories matter. Representation matters. Seeing yourself reflected in media, understanding you're not alone in your experiences, that matters more than anything. The series was set to film in the fall, with a premiere date the following spring. I agreed to serve as a consultant, ensuring the emotional truth of the story remained intact even if some details were changed for dramatic purposes. Around the same time, I started getting messages from women all over the country, people who'd read the articles or seen the social media posts about my wedding and the subsequent legal battle. They shared their own stories of being overlooked, stolen from, or diminished by family members. Some asked for advice. Others just wanted to say thank you for making them feel less alone. One message particularly stood out. It was from a woman named Catherine in Oregon who discovered her brother had been systematically stealing from their mother's estate while she was still alive, using power of attorney to drain accounts and sell property. She'd been afraid to speak up because family is family and you're supposed to forgive. But reading about my case had given her courage. She'd hired an attorney, filed a complaint, and was now in the process of getting justice for her mother and herself. Knowing I helped someone else find their voice, I told Derek that night, that means more than any amount of money ever could. He pulled me close, kissing the top of my head. You're amazing, you know that? I'm just someone who got tired of being treated badly and decided to do something about it, I said. That's not amazing. That should be the baseline. Maybe, he agreed. But in a world where people are conditioned to accept mistreatment, especially from family, choosing to fight back is actually pretty revolutionary. By summer, my life had found a new rhythm. The house renovations were nearly complete, turning our craftsmen into something that felt truly like home. My business was thriving to the point where I was being selective about clients, taking only projects that excited me. Derek and I were talking seriously about starting a family, feeling for the first time like we had the stability and resources to do it right. I'd built a chosen family of friends who celebrated my successes without jealousy and supported me through struggles without judgment. The final settlement payment came through in July, right on schedule. With it came a brief note from my parents' attorney, confirming all obligations had been fulfilled and wishing me well in stiff, formal language. There was nothing from my parents themselves, no acknowledgement, no apology, no attempt at reconciliation. Just money transferred and obligation completed. I realized I was okay with that. I didn't need their apology. I didn't need them to suddenly become different people or admit the full scope of what they'd done. The legal settlement was its own form of admission, and that was enough. I'd gotten what I came for: validation, restitution, and most importantly, freedom from the need for their approval. One afternoon in August, I was working in my home office when I saw a car pull up outside. My stomach dropped when I recognized it. Vanessa's black sedan, the one she'd bought with the trust money. I watched her sit there for a few minutes, clearly working up courage, before finally getting out and walking to my front door. The doorbell rang. I considered not answering, but curiosity won out. I opened the door but didn't invite her in, just stood there waiting for her to speak. "Hi," she said, and I was startled by how different she looked. Thinner, tired, her usual polish replaced by something more fragile. "Can we talk?" "Depends on what you want to talk about," I said carefully. "I don't know," she said, and her voice cracked slightly. "Maybe about how I ruined your wedding? Or how I spent 5 years enjoying money that should have been yours? Or how I never once questioned why I got everything and you got nothing?" There was a long silence. This was the moment I'd imagined 100 times, the confrontation where Vanessa would finally admit what she'd done and I'd get to tell her exactly how much damage she'd caused. But standing there, looking at my sister who'd aged 5 years in 5 months, I found I didn't have the energy for that fight anymore. "Why are you here, Vanessa?" I asked, not unkindly but not warmly either. "Just, why now?" "Because I've lost everything," she said simply. "Mom and Dad aren't speaking to me because I wouldn't testify on their behalf. My friends have all disappeared because they were never really friends, just people who liked being around someone who always picked up the check. I lost my job because the company didn't want the association with the scandal. And I've been sitting in my condo, the one I bought with your money, realizing that I don't actually know who I am without all the advantages I was given." A tear rolled down her cheek. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Nat. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that you were right about everything, and I'm sorry. It took losing it all for me to see how wrong I was, and that's pathetic, but it's true." I leaned against the doorframe, processing her words, looking for manipulation or calculation and finding only exhaustion and regret. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Nothing," she said, wiping at her eyes. "I don't want anything. I just needed to say I'm sorry. You deserved better from all of us, but especially from me. I should have been your sister, your ally. Instead, I was just another person taking advantage of you. I'm sorry for the wedding. I'm sorry about the money. I'm sorry for every time I made your achievements about me. You deserved better." We stood there for another moment, and I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not exactly. But maybe the beginning of letting go. "I don't know if we'll ever have a relationship again," I said honestly. "You hurt me in ways that don't just heal because you apologize. But I appreciate you saying this. It matters that you finally see it." She nodded, seeming to accept that. "For what it's worth," she said, "that dress you changed into at the wedding. It was incredible. You looked like you were made of light. Everyone was talking about it for months, and you deserved every second of that attention. I felt a small, sad smile tug at my lips. Thanks, Vanessa. She turned to leave, then paused. Are you happy? She asked, glancing back at me. Really happy? I thought about my house, my business, my marriage, the life I'd built on my own terms without anyone's permission or approval. Yeah, I said. I really am. Good, she said softly. That's good. I watched her walk back to her car and drive away, and I realized something important. Her apology didn't change anything material about my life. I already had the settlement, the vindication, the success. But it did close a loop I hadn't known was still open. It let me stop wondering if she'd ever understand what she'd done. Now I knew she did, and that knowledge was its own kind of peace. That evening, Derek and I sat on our back porch, watching the sun set over our garden. He'd been listening to me process Vanessa's visit for the past hour, offering thoughts when asked but mostly just being present. Do you think you'll ever really forgive them? He asked as the sky turned orange and purple. I don't know, I said honestly. I think forgiveness might be overrated anyway. I don't need to forgive them to move on. I just need to accept that they are who they are, and I'm not responsible for fixing or excusing it. He nodded thoughtfully. You've come a long way from the woman standing in that bridal suite, staring at her sister in a white dress. I laughed. That woman had no idea what she was about to unleash. Sometimes I wonder if I would have done it all differently if I'd known how big this would get. Would you? He asked. I thought about it, really thought about it. The lawsuit, the media attention, the family implosion, all of it. No, I said finally. I wouldn't change a thing. Because for the first time in my life, I chose myself. I chose honesty over peacekeeping. I chose justice over comfort. And that choice gave me this life, this house, this peace. So no, I wouldn't change it. The streaming series premiered the following spring to massive viewership and critical acclaim. They'd changed names and some details, but the emotional core remained true. The actress playing me was brilliant, capturing both the vulnerability of someone who'd been mistreated for years and the steel that emerges when you finally decide to fight back. The finale, which showed the courtroom victory and the protagonist walking away from her family with her head high, had people in tears and sparked countless conversations about family dynamics and financial abuse. I did a few interviews to promote the series, carefully maintaining my boundaries about what I would and wouldn't discuss. But the message I tried to convey was consistent. You're not obligated to accept mistreatment just because it comes from family. You're allowed to demand better. You're allowed to walk away. And you're allowed to use every legal tool at your disposal to protect yourself and get what's rightfully yours. The second anniversary of my wedding came around in June. Derek suggested we renew our vows, do a small ceremony that would be about us and not about making statements or fighting battles. We gathered a small group of friends in our backyard garden, which had flourished over the past year into something genuinely beautiful. Kelsey stood as my witness again, and Derek's brother stood as his. There were no elaborate dresses this time, just a simple white sundress I'd picked up at a boutique downtown. No photographers except Troy, who'd become a genuine friend, taking pictures because he wanted to document our joy, not because we were paying him. No family drama, no uninvited guests in white, no statements to make. Just two people who'd weathered a storm together and come out stronger, promising again to keep choosing each other. As we cut into the small cake afterward, Kelsey raised her glass for a toast. To Natalie, she said, her voice warm with affection and pride. The woman who wore a $250,000 dress to her own wedding and somehow made that the least interesting thing she did that year. To standing up, speaking out, and never backing down. Everyone laughed and drank, and I felt a wave of gratitude for these people, my chosen family, who celebrated me without needing me to be smaller or quieter or more convenient. Later that night, after everyone had left and Derek and I were cleaning up paper plates and champagne flutes, my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from the financial advisor who'd been managing my settlement money and the streaming series proceeds. The subject line read, Portfolio Update, and when I opened it, I had to read the number 3 times to believe it. Between smart investments, the business growth, and the series money, my net worth had crossed into 7 figures. I was a millionaire. Not from family money or inherited wealth or advantages I'd been born into, but from my own work and from fighting to reclaim what had been stolen from me. I showed Derek the email, and he let out a long, low whistle. "That's incredible, Nat. What are you going to do with it?" I thought about that question as we finished cleaning up and got ready for bed. I thought about the woman I'd been 2 years ago, desperate for approval, willing to accept scraps, believing that asking for more made me selfish or ungrateful. I thought about the woman I'd become, someone who knew her worth and refused to settle for less. Someone who understood that the best revenge isn't cruelty or vindictiveness, but building a life so fulfilling that the people who tried to diminish you become irrelevant to your happiness. I'm going to use it to make sure our kids, if we have them, never wonder if they're enough, I said finally. I'm going to build something that can't be taken away. And I'm going to keep telling my story, because somewhere out there is another woman standing in a bridal suite, watching someone try to steal her moment, and she needs to know that she doesn't have to accept it. She needs to know that fighting back is an option, that justice is possible, and that choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. Derek pulled me close, and I rested my head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady and sure. The phoenix necklace he'd given me caught the light from the bedside lamp, a reminder of what I'd survived and who I'd become. Tomorrow, I'd wake up in my beautiful house, go to work at the business I'd built, and continue living a life that no one could diminish or take away. But tonight, I let myself simply be grateful. Grateful for the fight that had freed me, grateful for the man who'd stood beside me through it all, and grateful for the hard-won knowledge that I was, finally and completely, enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.